Has this ever happened to you? Think it's safe just to scrape and plate? Well, it's not, and I'm about to show you why. The aim of this experiment is to determine whether or not removing the mouldy section of food makes it safe to eat. I believe that removing the mould from the food will not make it safe to eat, as there will still be mould spores buried deep within the food that is invisible to the naked eye, which will make the mould continue to grow. To test this myth, we're going to need the following: 20 agar plates, which will each have a different food source coming from a different location on it. 20 plates, which will each have a different food source in a different location on it as well. We are also going to need a chopping board and some utensils, 2 knives and a spoon, which will all be rinsed regularly to keep the test reliable and to make sure that there's no cross-contamination of the foods. Now, to make sure that some of the foods don't get a large amount of light, we've got 3 boxes, one which will go in a room temperature environment, one which will go in a dark dry environment, and one which will go in a warm humid environment. Now, for our food sources, we have Greek yogurt, which is a fairly basic substance. We have bread, which is a fairly neutral substance. And we also have oranges, which are an acidic substance. We're going to need some cotton wool buds to transfer the mould from the oranges, the bread and the yogurts over to the agar plates. To make the results more reliable, I'm going to repeat each test. I'm going to have one control agar plate to make my results more reliable, to prove that the agar plates themselves are uncontaminated. As the food will grow mould in it, which can potentially be dangerous, after I've taken the swabs with the cotton wool sticks onto the agar plates, the cotton wool sticks will have to be disposed, as otherwise it could hurt people. Once the mould samples are in the agar plates, they'll need to be sealed up with sticky tape to ensure that the mould can't escape the agar plates. After the experiment has been completed, all food will need to be thrown away into a bin or a safe disposal area, as will the remaining cotton wool buds, to ensure that no mould has been spread to them. All other things, such as plates, which the foods were on, will also have to be disposed, and all utensils and the chopping board will also have to be cleaned thoroughly. The agar plates themselves will also have to be handed back to the science staff, which will dispose of them safely, possibly through incineration. Let's break the mold between just talking about it and actually doing it. Let's get started.
Step 1. After collecting all equipment, place the required amount of plates on the table. After the plates have been spread out, chop 6 oranges into halves on the chopping board, followed by placing 1 teaspoon of the Greek yogurt onto a separate plate. Use the remaining space on the plates with the oranges on them to cut 6 slices of bread in half, making sure to use a different knife to the one that was used to cut the oranges. Step 2. After placing the foods onto each plate, fill 4 small freezer bags with 20 milliliters of water. These bags act as the humid environment as they have a large amount. Step 3. Place the foods into their relevant environments.
The dark, warm, humid environment grew the most mould. It's everywhere. The light, humid environment also grew quite a fair bit of mould, but not as much as I expected. This could be because the ultraviolet light from the sun killed off a lot of the mould.
Step 4. Remove foods from environments and scrape off visible mould, if any. Step 5. Swab the cleaned area of each food with a cotton wool swab. Discard each swab after it has been used once. Swab the agar plates and seal them with sticky tape before labeling them. Step 6. Place the food inside its relevant environment for another 5 days.
The foods that grew the most mould were the yogurt in the light, warm, humid environment, the orange in the cool, dry, dark environment, and the bread in the dark, warm, humid environment. Surprisingly, the controls were two of the plates that grew some of the largest quantities of mould. This is because the brief exposure to the air that they experienced had plenty of mould and bacteria already in it, which spread onto the plates, and then in the agar jelly germinated.
In this graph, the larger the bar, the more mould that the food grew. Foods which have no bar mean that those foods did not grow any visible mould. As can be seen throughout this experiment, removing mould visible to the naked eye does not remove all the mould from the food. Mould spreads via microscopic spores, so even a single spore can end up growing a whole colony of mould, which reproduces rapidly. Mould grows best in a warm, dark environment with a high humidity to help stimulate growth. Surprisingly, in my experiment, the mould grew best on the most neutral substance, the bread. Certain aspects of this experiment did not work perfectly. First and foremost, the control agar plates had mould growing on them when I removed them from the fridge. The reason for this is likely to be the fact that mould spores were carried by the fans situated throughout our house. The mould in the agar plates grew on the very edge of the agar jelly, so it is likely that a stray spore nestled itself to the side of the agar plate and then began to grow in the nutrient-rich jelly. The fridge also dried out the foods too much to be of any use. If I decide to repeat this experiment again, it would be more beneficial to use a cool environment which still allows the food inside to grow mould, as I believe the cold environment killed any mould that grew. Finally, the vast majority of the foods that were left in sunlight had no visible mould growth on them. Moulds naturally do not grow well in sunlight, so I hypothesize that the ultraviolet rays of the sun managed to kill the vast majority of the mould spores, thus leaving no visible mould for the naked eye to see.
As can be seen, removing the mould from the foods did not prevent them from growing further mould. If anything, they became worse. In conclusion, these tests have proved beyond doubt that it is not safe to remove the mouldy section of food, as there is an abundance of mould spores still within the food that is invisible to the naked eye, which can make you sick if consumed. So next time you think it's safe to scrape and plate, then think again.